And Dr. Sciuchetti is here to talk to us about OER. And this is going to be an important initiative for the university over this year and for the next coming year. So thank you for being here, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Sciuchetti.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And again, thanks everyone for taking the time to join us this morning on a Tuesday at 10:30 and allowing me to share some of my background and insights on open educational resources and what we're trying to do here at JSU with a group that has come together to start looking at how we can use this across the campus. So I've put together a PowerPoint that is quite detailed, so I put it in the chat, and Chris is also going to share it because there are a lot of good links in there to material and some sites that you might consider checking out after the presentation and getting to know a little bit more about OER. So what I'm going to talk about today are three areas. OER in general, what is it? It's a little bit of its history. Then I'll talk about sources of OER, so where you can find this material, who houses it, what universities are producing it in places like that. And then finally, I'll just touch upon the creation of OER. And I've also done a Faculty Commons presentation on that as well, that I went through in full detail, all of the creation aspect. And so that's available. So I'm just going to touch on some of that today. And throughout the presentation, if anyone has any questions or needs me to stop to ask something, please feel free to do so, or you could put it in the chat. So what is OER? OER at its base level is free and open teaching and learning materials that can come in any medium. It's part of a larger idea of open solutions, which was a way to provide things like open software, open access, and open data. And so with those initiatives, OER is a way to provide an openly licensed material at no cost to a user. So a user can adopt, redistribute, reuse, and remix any material that's been placed or assigned an OER license or an open license. And that's where Creative Commons comes in, and I want to just touch upon it here. Creative Commons is just a licensing tool that allows a user to take their content that's original that they created and put a copyright license on it that allows you to still get credit for the material you've created and are distributing. And you can choose the type of license that you put on top of that material. So it still allows it to be free and it allows it to be openly available at no cost, but it gives the creator some type of credit. And we'll talk about more of the Creative Commons license towards the end of the presentation. But OER really comes up with UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization. They started talking about this in 2002. And some of the sources they listed as OER material were what they were looking at textbook for underdeveloped or third world countries that obviously couldn't afford costly material for education. And so UNESCO is trying to provide some type of freely available yet academic, rigorous, and scholarly material to those places. So textbooks were kind of the #1 source, but we also have things like group activities, worksheets, assessments, and really anything could be placed in an open source. We'll talk about the positives and negatives of that in a little while. So the beginnings of OER start really at MIT with this idea of open courseware, and there's a link here for you on that. And the idea was to provide for a lot of their courses free and open material, because of course at MIT you've got some of the top minds in their fields. They're producing textbooks, they're producing material, And this was a way to provide it to the university campus at no cost, and then beyond the university campus in working with the United Nations to provide it to a wider public who should have access to this material that MIT is putting out. The other thing is the government provides, of course, grants and funding to a lot of universities. And one of the ways that it was looked at in its early days prior to the 90s was that since citizens are paying into this money that's being grant funded to universities, they should benefit from that knowledge and have it at no cost. So open courseware was a way to do that. And so the term OER, Open Educational Resources, was coined in '98 by David Wiley, who I'll actually show the book he wrote on open courseware in a moment. And UNESCO, as I said, picked it up in 2002 during their forum on the impact of open courseware for higher education in developing countries, as I stated earlier. And I've posted that there for you as well. And under that 2002 statement from UNESCO, they decided there were 4 categories for open courseware, or OER. It was open courseware, but there are also, aside from the material that's being published, there are OER publishers. So those places or sites or entities that are willing to create some platform for creators to put out their material. Then there are OER repositories, those places that are going to house the material that the publishers and the content creators put out. And mostly we've seen those repositories being places like UNESCO and universities. A lot of universities have taken on the task of standing as repositories of the material that their instructors and faculty are producing. And then, of course, publicly funded initiatives. As I said earlier, a lot of the grant funding that universities received carry with it the idea that when the work is done, it'll be publicly available. And so one of the ways that they've gone ahead to try to make that happen is to create initiatives where any grant-funded project has some type of stipulation that it be publicly available through an OER possibly. And not all grants have that, but some of them do. This is the book I was talking about by Wiley, and it's a fairly new book, and it's on a platform, as you can see here, called PB, or Press Books, where they publish OER content. And he created a really, I think, good guide. It's supposed to be an interactive, so a good guide on what OER is. And so a lot of the material from my presentation comes from reading his book and taking a course that was developed around his ideas, and kind of structuring what it means to have something that's open and freely available, how that differs from other types of sources. So he separates out software, but he also talks about copyright, so intellectual property. And then he talks about, if we scroll down on his list here, I guess I can't scroll in PowerPoint, but when you scroll down on his list, he talks about how OER can be implemented at a university. So he gives a good overview of what OER is, and I'd highly encourage you to check that out and check out his e-reader, especially if towards the end you're considering adopting an OER. He talks about how you can go about that, because it can be a daunting task. And we'll talk about some of the beginning steps in this presentation, but he gives it a lot of detail and care on how to do that step by step, and acknowledging that it takes some time. So I just wanted to make you aware of that, put that out there. So now that you have an idea of what OER is, it's really about why do we care to use it or create it. And one of the main reasons that I found in my research in looking at OER and using OER at different institutions is, we've talked about how UNESCO adopted it as a way to provide knowledge and information to developing countries. But here at home, really the impetus for OER is that college textbooks are extremely expensive. They do provide good content, and they are organized well and provide supplemental materials, but they're not cost effective. They are oftentimes purchased by students without any use. And students, this creates an issue with students, because as you can see here, about 94% of students are reporting that they believe they're suffering academically because of their choices to either buy the book or not. And mostly it's to not buy the book when they can't afford to buy it. And a lot of them believe, 82% in fact, that they would do better in a course if they were provided a textbook online or even hard copy that was free. And I won't go into the details in this presentation, but we did a short pilot study of OER here in our physical geography classes. And if you're interested, I did a separate presentation on that, discussing the outcomes of moving to an OER here. And we found that students did do significantly better, and they had a significantly better attitude in the course when they weren't having to struggle over a decision to buy a textbook or not. And we do serve a very underrepresented and large minority population at JSU. So this is a good time to start talking about this and bringing OER into the conversation, especially with the population we serve. And a lot of them first-generation students or returning students who really are struggling to decide between purchasing a textbook or something else that is, more important to their daily lives, such as food or housing. And this is just another look at how the cost of books has changed from 2016 to 2020 by type of institution. And what we can see is there's really not a significant or large change from year to year, but there is a significant difference institution to institution type. And of course, we're a public in-state university, and you can see average for a student for all of their texts across all disciplines every year is about $1,200, and that's a large cost. And so the Oregon Higher Education Coordination Commission, which I wish we had a group doing this here, and they're beginning to put it together, the Alabama Commission on Higher Education, but they looked at the costs of a textbook, the average max cost, the average minimum cost, and the enrollment numbers for different courses over all sections, and found that obviously if you've switched from a purchased textbook from a large publishing company, which $100 might not seem like much for say the college algebra textbook, but when you add it up across all of the courses a student takes every year, it does become a significant factor in their finances. And they found that overall students are saving upwards of $1 million, or they're saving students $1 million in terms of all students in all sections for that year, or more, by switching from a traditional textbook to an OER. And so again, the example of mathematics, college algebra, which is a typical required course, saw an enrollment in 2013 of 19,000 students. By switching over to an OER, they were able to save their students $2 million, right? All student savings. And so that's a significant amount. I mean, if we look at the totals, even the average cost, $100, that's $100 in a decision between buying a textbook or, let's say, saving for rent or something like that. And I think that's one of the things we often forget about. So the benefits of switching to OER, as I hope are clear now, it reduces the cost for the student who is already paying us, in tuition for the content knowledge that we're providing. And we're asking them to then purchase third-party, it's like asking them to purchase a third-party provider's material and knowledge that they've already paid us for. And so there are incentives when they come to class and they see that we're going to teach this course based on a kind of already a set up negotiation that they've paid tuition and we're going to provide them with a service. And they appreciate that, and it shows really well in what they do and their abilities to finish their assignments and do well in the course. So it reduces that cost, but it also increases the capability of schools to provide new content. We can enrich our learning beyond just what's in the textbook. And oftentimes that's difficult, especially if a faculty member is requiring a student to buy a textbook. On our side, we often feel wed to that material. We feel guilty sometimes for asking them to purchase a $200 book and try to stick with exactly what's in that text, ask them quizzes and questions just from that text. And whether we realize it or not, prohibits us from being innovative in our teaching. And a lot of us, I think, are innovative and we go beyond our textbooks. But that's always, at least for me when I started, sitting there in the back of my mind. And of course, with the use of open educational resources, since there are a plethora of them and they're created by so many different content creators and they're not controlled by a publisher or one publisher, they're controlled by the actual creator. You see students increasing in engagement because sometimes their faculty members can become creators of that material by repurposing or reusing something that's already been created. So with that, of course, there are challenges that content changes, especially in some of our fields. The content is always shifting. And so if the open educational material is not changing or being kept up to date, that becomes a larger issue. Whereas publishers are putting out new editions every couple of years. Some of the OER is, once it's created, if their creator doesn't want to update it, it stays there. With that, though, the OER that I've used have been by really good creators who update the material every year. I use one for my world geography course that every time something happens in a world region that's a major world issue, such as example between Russia and the Ukraine right now, she's updated her textbook to reflect that and puts in, there are activities in there with news articles and they're always current. That's, I think, a little bit more of the extreme side of the upkeep of OER, but it is there. It also depends on access to a computer or internet, but that's something that we provide at the university to our students. So by switching to an OER, they already have access through their fees and services at the university to computers and internet. So it is a challenge if they try to do this at home or they need physical copies, but there are workarounds to that. And then, of course, resistance by instructors to switch because it's not a prepackaged plan when you switch to an OER. So it sometimes can be daunting and difficult if you're teaching 4 or 5 classes, multiple sections, especially if you're new to come in and try to use an OER because you have to actually become somewhat of a creator of that content by trying to make it fit with your teaching style. And then finally, a challenge of copyright and intellectual property. That can be an issue because the Creative Commons that I'll talk about is one way to license your material, but it doesn't give you the same kind of leverage and authority as publishing with, say, Pearson or some other company. That would also look, I think, more favorably in promotion and tenure, and that's another discussion on how OER should be considered in that process, right? Because a lot of us are creating that material, but we're kind of keeping it for ourselves because to make it open is not actually going to help us or benefit us professionally. And so that's something that also needs to be brought into the conversation. But those are just some of the challenges. So that was an overview that I understand might have been kind of quick on what OER is, so where to find it. That's the easy and fun part because it's pretty much everywhere. And on this slide, I've provided some places to find it, and we'll look at a couple of them that I think are really important. And I did want to mention that, as you can see here, a lot of universities have created LibGuides, and some of you might be familiar with LibGuides. They've created LibGuides just for OER. Many universities have done this, so if you even just put into Google OER, LibGuides, you'll find all kinds of them, and a lot of them are very well put together. And I did want to mention that here at JSU, we're working on that. We've put together a group that's, our librarian, Hanrong, is helping us put together the LibGuide page for JSU, where there's a lot of material will be accessible, and a lot of the stuff that I'll talk about in the presentation will also be in there, and that's, up and coming, so please look forward to that. But some of the big repositories are OpenStax and Open Textbooks. And even in Google, you can search, if you use the advanced search, you can change the usage rights to be free to use. So if you're looking for something, an article or some type of research or even just something for your class, you can even limit your search within Google. And so it's not a repository for OER, but in a search to just find those things that are free use or Creative Commons license. So I talked at the beginning a little bit about sources of OER, and just to kind of go over some of them again, we've got the databases in OER that are they house just OER material, but also government agencies. That was part of the idea of open software, open data early on. How OER came about was government agencies have to provide information openly. You can, with the Freedom of Information Act, you can request information. So that's part of that kind of initiative to make things open and available. There are also a lot of nonprofit foundations, professional associations. So for me as a geographer, the American Association of Geographers provides a lot of educational material for free to us that you don't have to be a member to access, but it is put together by members, and the content is created by members of the association. And really, a lot of it's for K through 12 students and those instructors. But professional associations have a bunch of OER often. It's just sometimes you have to look for them. And then also educational institutions such as JSU, Penn State, a lot of the Rice University, the bigger universities have great repositories of OER. And then even just ourselves, among us here at JSU, we're building a repository, but we also have our Canvas pages, which allow us to share material. So this is the MIT OpenCourseware that I talked was kind of the beginning of all of this. And on this page, you can see where you can search for material by specific course types. So one of the books I use for my human geography course comes from the MIT OpenCourseware and is actually put together by a professor at MIT. And I found that by searching through department type, but you could also look at some of the professional development things they have for OER. I like this page because it just provides what MIT has produced, which is high caliber, good material. It's produced by people who are publishing in the field. That's the other thing. A lot of the individuals publishing in OER, they don't publish textbooks, but they are leaders in their field publishing academic scholarly articles. And so they are, the authority in many cases in what they're putting together for OER. So it doesn't make it any less rigorous or any less scholarly because it's not published by McGraw-Hill or some other big publishing house. It's published by people who are actually, and in some cases, doing a lot of research and taking their time and care to put together this OER, whereas with a large published textbook, you're under the scrutiny of deadlines by your publisher. You've got to meet certain criteria for that publication. With the OER, you're a little freer and can incorporate even your own research into the topic at hand. So that's the MIT OpenCourseware. And this next one is the OER Commons. This is a really great place to find textbooks, and I use my World Regional Geography textbook from here, but you could easily go in and just, for example, search biology, and you can fine tune all of these things, but you can see there are different types. Whoops, I remember I can't scroll in there. Sorry about that. There are all types of things. For some reason, I can't scroll when it's embedded, but there are assignments, but there are full textbooks. You can narrow this down by license type. So if you want a textbook that you not only can use, but you can modify, you could look at that here, and we'll talk about those licenses in a little bit. So they'd be unrestricted licenses. There are some licenses that they're only sharing, so you can use it, you can provide it to your students, but you can't change anything in it. Let's close that. And so you can see some of the ways you can narrow down the search that you do in here. Again, I can't scroll because it'll change slides, but there's a lot of material that ends up popping up here. This one from Rice University, they have a series on like their gen ed types of topics, and they're always with a color with the title split in half. So they've got biology, algebra, physical geography, many types of science courses, and their textbooks are, I think, very well put together. And if you go to any of them, you can actually see who's contributed to it, but also faculty and staff at a lot of other universities who have reviewed it. So these are reviewed in some way, shape, or form. And their pages are quite large, and you can see everything that this text has. And like I said, if you were using this text and you found that, when you get to a topic that you want to incorporate something that text doesn't have, that's where there's a flexibility and allowance, even that you're not stuck to this. You're not wed to this text because you forced the student to buy it. You can kind of play around with it. So that's another one of our sources there. Whoops. And then we have OpenStax, which is a third repository. That's the Rice one from Rice University. This one here, which was OER Commons, kind of pulls in things from all over the place. So OpenStax is another good one that houses many different types of OER. As you can see, they're little science type blocks there. They do focus a lot on the natural sciences. And then I put together a page for you. That's why I provide the PowerPoint with links to a bunch of other repositories that I've used to kind of find my material. And again, they're all over the place. But Merlot, Open Textbook Library, Galileo even has an open search, and a bunch of these others. And I won't go through all of them. But I did finally want to mention a type of OER that I think sometimes we forget about is in Canvas, there's a little button on the left that says Commons, and you can actually click on that, and it takes you to a page where, as you can see here, I just searched geography, and I've got 1,300 results on either full courses in geography or where somebody's put together a textbook and put it in Canvas, modules, assignments. These are all things that instructors across different age groups, different areas have made their stuff freely available. So by publishing it to the Commons, you've given others the right to access and reuse your material. And you can find all that in here. And I've actually used a few, sometimes assignments when I'm looking for something, and I have an assignment that hasn't been working well for a semester, so I want to try something different. I look in here and see what other people have done that is a similar topic. And then finally, on the creation of OER, I just wanted to provide these links, which are kind of like starter books on where to get going if you're interested in finding OER, teaching with it, and then they also talk about creating it. So the Abby Adler is really big in OER, and she's put together quite a few interesting books on taking you through the process, kind of step by step, if you need help getting through using an OER for the first time. That was another one of her books. My page froze. I think I put too many links in PowerPoint. It didn't like it. Well, while we're looking at this screen and I'm pulling up OER, the final section of that I wanted to talk about, because I know my hour is coming to a close, the final section I wanted to talk about was creating OER. Now I need to swap my displays. So again, all of these links are provided in the PowerPoint. So creating OER. So now you have an idea of what OER is, where it started, hopefully a good idea on where to find it. And again, you could even just do a Google search with narrowing down the advanced tool to just find OER as another way. Creative Commons is the way to then either take that OER that you find and reuse it, or create your own. And I think the most important aspect to the Creative Commons for us is maybe not making our own at the beginning, but taking someone else's OER and then deciding, well, I want to add a chapter on this, or I want to add an assignment if you're using a lab manual or something, and using that and Creatively Commons licensing that new material as your own, And of course, you'll give attribute to those who created it before you, and using that in your classroom. I think that's kind of a good starting point with OER and Creative Commons licensing, is to license material that you add to first before you try to dive into creating your own OER, which can be a daunting task. I know, because I'm trying to work on one myself, and it's not easy. So what OER can you create? Like I said, adding to people's material. You can create chapters on an existing material or excerpts, but you also the videos you create for your class. And some of us, I know some of my colleagues post they make short little videos on very specific topics, 15 minutes or less. They post them to YouTube. They could Creatively Commons license that. They could put that all together as a unit and say, well, here's my module on Earth dynamics, relationships of human beings to the Earth's surface. And there's a bunch of short videos together in there, and that would allow someone else to freely use those videos. Same things with lessons, class activities. We all create a lot of our own activities, put them together. It's nice to be able to provide that to the large OER community, to give people options that we have honed over years to put together and share that, because then we can then use other OER, adapt it, and kind of create this new thing that we need to really adapt in our teaching as we move forward every year with new students and new groups of students, new populations we're going to serve. Sometimes our lessons, our activities need to adapt to that situation. And so to have a repository where you could go to either change up your own or look at somebody else's who's just created it is a way to contribute. And instructor material, and then student contributions. I know there's a lot of my colleagues, especially in English departments at different universities, who have put together OER books based on student writing. So looking at like how to write a short story, bad examples, good examples, process examples, and things like that. I know that's where I've seen student contributions, and I haven't seen any in the sciences or any other discipline, but it'd be nice to see some develop there. And so the place to go and do that is Creative Commons, and I want to show you that. I couldn't get that to link in the PowerPoint, but it is really easy. And I'm briefly going to go through how to do this. And then in the PowerPoint are all the different types of licenses, and you're free to look at those. And if you have questions at the end, I'd be happy to answer them. But if you go to creativecommons.org, it is very, very simple, as you just share your work and you choose a type of license that's going to fit you. And again, I'll talk about those in a moment. But they actually created a tool that kind of asks you questions as you go through, so you don't have to know the licenses or the different categories or attributes that exist. You can just answer a few questions. So, and this is if you're creating your own. And there's another one for if you're going to use or remix somebody else's material, but it's the same type of form. So I'm just going to stick with this one. But if you do decide to adopt somebody else's textbook that allows you to edit it, and you edit it and add something to it, you might want to consider creating a license on that one that is a remix of their material with your name on it. And that's where, there should be later on a conversation of how OER should be considered in terms of promotion and tenure and faculty development and professional development, because we are creating content, we are licensing it. It's just it has not been done by a professional publisher, and it is being reviewed in many cases, and you can seek reviewers. I do know I've put together small things, little assignments, and I put together a website, and I've asked reviewers who are, top in their field, they've been publishing on the topic that I published on, to review my OER, and they did, and they actually put their reviews online, which was nice. But why do that if it doesn't count for anything? And so that's another conversation. So to go through the licensing tool, it truly is quite easy. Do you want to allow others to adapt your work? Of course. Do you want to allow commercial use? That's where, if you do create something, this mostly comes up in art. If you create a design or something, if you don't say no here, somebody could use that and slap it on something and sell it, right? And so they're getting some commercial benefit out of that. So I usually don't want it for commercial gain, because to be honest, so I'm not going to gain financially from it. Somebody else shouldn't. But you can see that's you get a license that looks something like this, where your attribute is non-commercial and it's accessible to others. And that's kind of the basics of how that works. You can then create your icon, and this is what you would add to your material at the bottom, in a footer or at the front matter of the book or whatever you've created. And they even give you an embed code if you are doing it on a website. And you've now attributed your work to copyright by you for non-commercial use, meaning anybody could use it, they can remix it, they can add to it, and then of course relicense it. And that's about it on the licensing feature here. And there's, like I said, others you can go to reuse and remix and try that as well. They also have a new version that they're coming out with that I haven't played with yet. It's a beta version, so if you hit get started, you can try this new version of licensing that they came up with, but I haven't done that yet. It is fairly similar, though. You answer a few questions on how you want your material to be used, and then allow it for use, and you get a license at the end that you can put on your material. But in the PowerPoint, just as an overview, oops, these are the types of licenses you can use. Attribution alone means all someone has to do to use your material or recopyright it is just say that you made the original version. Attribution with no derivatives means you can use it and you can spread it around, but you can't change it, which is not one that we see common. Attribution share alike, our third one here, allows anyone to use it, but if they create another version, so if I use someone's textbook, but I add a chapter to it, I have to make sure when I license it, I allow it to be shared as well. So my copy or my version has to be shareable too. Non-commercial is the one we just created, which is saying all someone has to do is say it's by me, and then they can reuse it, they can remix it, they can recreate it. They just can't use it to sell something. And then, of course, non-commercial, non-derivative, whoops. It can't be used for commercial purposes, and there can't be other types of it produced or other formats. And then non-commercial share alike, same thing. You have to credit the person who created it. You can't use it for commercial use. And if you do make a derivative or another version of it, you have to share it as non-commercial as well. So you can't take something, let's say the symbol of JSU here in the corner of my screen, add a little something to it, and then make it by attribute and make it commercial, where so somebody could use it to sell a product. You couldn't do that with that final license. And so the last part here, we just kind of went through it in that brief overview, and so I'm not going to go through this part of the PowerPoint. I just wanted to provide it for those who might have questions or need some more detailed information on each type of license, but I think what I provided was a good quick overview. So that's my presentation on OER. I hope you found it helpful, and does anyone have any questions?
Any questions? Feel free to go ahead and ask. Or comments.
Very useful. Thank you very much.
Has anybody been using OER or thinking about using it?
Hi, Mark. I have a question here.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, what do you think the differences between reviewing a traditional textbook and OER textbook?
The only real difference that I see, and I've not been asked to review an OER, but I've been asked to review a textbook. I've reviewed an OER, but not been officially asked to review it. Is that there's somebody guiding the process with the review of the textbook, but that's really it. The publisher, of course, is going to guide that process. They're going to help you choose reviewers, or they're going to even choose the reviewers. But with OER, you could get those same people to review your material. You just have to reach out and ask. And oftentimes, like I said, with this website I created on Moravian history, I put a lot of material and content in there, and it's an OER. And we contacted some people who actually have written on the topic, and this one guy, his name's David Bodenheimer. He's kind of like the head in our field in terms of digital scholarship and history, specifically with colonial settlement, which is when the Moravians existed. And he agreed to write a review for us. And he writes reviews for large textbooks, monographs. He's an editor for a bunch of different historical journals. He's been on the American Historical Association's editorial board, and he wrote a review. It's just there was no control of the publisher on doing it. And he reviewed it like he would if he was reviewing a published material.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Mark, it's Justin.
Hey, Justin.
Great presentation. I thought this was uncanny how timely it was. I just had a student this morning tell me that she had not purchased the textbook for one of my courses, because the cost was prohibitive. So really interesting. I signed up for OER Commons and was looking at the Rice biology text.
Yeah.
I see a button for add OER, and I see links for downloading the content. How would, looking at the range of topics, they look really good, but my main concern is perhaps that some of these topics, the material is not the depth that I would prefer. So how could I go ahead and go in and add some depth to some of these topics? In other words, edit the existing OER.
Yeah, so I know Rice is when you go to their page and like you said, you can download what it downloads as is a PDF. And what I've done usually is if you have an editing software like Adobe Creative Cloud software, I just went in and edited it, added a page and put in whatever I wanted. The only thing I did with theirs is you have, or at least for the Rice material, is when you do that, I always make sure I put a Creative Commons license on it. So I don't have to go out and put it in a repository, but I do license it. And if I put it in my courseware in Canvas, students know that it wasn't me creating this whole thing. It was, I did this little portion of it. But that was the best way I found to do it, is using Adobe Suite to kind of just take what's there and add some blank pages in between sections. I think I know what you're talking about. Sometimes they kind of give a broad overview of topics because they're trying to create a quick general education concise version. And so, for instance, on one that I did, they had one page on types of rocks, sedimentary, metamorphic, and so on. There's only one page. And so I just added a bunch of blank pages, and I used their template for like their design and stuff, and then just wrote my own material to add to it. But really, any way that you see fit that you can add to the material, you're free to do that, because like with Rice, it's all open by attribute only. I think non-commercial as well. So you could easily just add to that material. The other way I've done it too is I have some OER that are as websites, like the person published it on a website instead of in a repository. And I got permission from them to download the website as a PDF and just altered the PDF as well. So basically editing a PDF.
Thank you. Yeah, I think part of my question is, can you push the changes back? But I guess you don't have to do that. It sounds
No,
like
yeah, you don't have to.
it's easier to just download it, modify it, and provide it. Okay, thanks.
Now with Rice, since they have their platform, and also the other one, EP, those platforms, you could push it back there if you wanted. So you can see on my screen here the press books. This is that world geography book I was talking about. I've seen, not of this one, but derivatives of other books that people took this content and they added to it, made a more in-depth version, and published it back onto this platform, Press Books, which is a really good one because they're pretty uniform in their look. So if you publish back to it, they'll help you if you need help making it look really nice. That book I showed at the beginning, where did it go? Same platform. Oh, well, it doesn't want to open up, but same platform. It looks nice, and I think if you're so inclined to do, I think it helps in two ways. It's easy for students to access this web page, and they can then download it if they want. And if they don't want, the Pressbooks site is also mobile friendly. So a lot of my students access the World textbook on their phones. And the other thing is, like I said, maybe sometime here in the future, there needs to be consideration for things we create like this in terms of our tenure and promotion. That we've spent a lot of time, as you're saying, I want to update a section of this book, but I don't need to write the whole book. We should be giving credit for even that small segment that we contribute and then republish for others to use. And they might see that and say, oh, I was thinking that same thing. That section on whatever you're interested in updating was needed for this type of class, for an intro biology class. They need to have a little more in depth on this topic. So yeah. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you, Mark.
Hope that answered your question. Other questions?
These are some great questions. Anyone have any more? I don't want this discussion to end. This has been really good. Well, if no one has any other okay, Henrong is typing something. I just want to say, and Mark, I don't have the date. If you know the date, Mark will also be doing another presentation on OER through Faculty Commons. And it will be about OER, but it will be from a different angle. So if you want to talk about that, you can go ahead and talk about that, Mark.
That one, I believe. Oh, does somebody have a question?
She just said someone has their hand raised.
That's me.
Okay, go ahead.
Mark, great presentation. Thanks for sharing that with us. I just want to see how, if you could share those links and resources or your PowerPoint with us. I don't know that I can get that information. Also, you know that I ask students to get books for my GIS class, that some students came to me and said that he cannot afford that. So I have to get my TA book. And I was considering, just because I can develop my own GIS labs, you know, so the students don't need to go spend $150 on a book. So yeah, I think that's a great idea, you know, to help the students that way. And if you could share those, maybe I can find more resources for them. Sure.
I'd like to quickly mention that, and I didn't see the Teams thing, but Dr. Garaharchi in my department, she's been working with me on developing the use of the OER in the physical geography classroom. And I will say that she creates a lot of material for our courses, and a lot of it is provided to the entire faculty in our department. So whether she knows it or not, she's creating a lot of OER. She's just not sharing it widely, but she's sharing it with our department. And I do appreciate that she's considering to use an OER textbook or create one for our GIS labs, which is, if some of you don't know, we've just started the Masters in GIS. And that would be a great advancement for that program to start using OER. So I didn't realize you were here, Saida, and I really appreciate that. And I do appreciate that all you're doing for our students to start using this type of material. And the PowerPoint is actually linked in the chat. So anybody who wants access to that, and all of the links are in there, even though some of them seem to be very slow on my computer. I think it's because I'm running Teams with video and screen share, but all of the links are in there. Yeah. And at some point, hopefully we will see more material from Saida posted somewhere, because she does make a lot of great assignments that I think go beyond just our discipline that are useful in general education.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. I would be happy to collaborate and improve our courses. I'm moving away from the physical geography one, but I definitely share the resources with you. Yeah, and then hopefully develop more for physical too.
Thank you. And Chris's question, my next presentation is actually still in the works, but we were considering doing something similar to this thing. Chris asked me to do this. So I think the next one is going to focus more on more like a workshop where you'll hopefully have something, or I'll share something that will Creative Commonsly license together and look at that process. And if you don't bring anything to that type of workshop, we'll look at things that either I have that we want to publish or something. So we'll look more concretely at the process of OER, and hopefully you'll leave that session with something creatively licensed that you can spread out there, and as I said, get credit for that you created, and you're contributing to the field, because that's one of the things we're supposed to do.
That sounds like a great compliment to this presentation, Mark.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's see. I was going to say, I know what I was going to say. So this is really the beginning of an OER initiative that Dr. Walsh is really behind this, and so this is going to be something that is going to be becoming more and more known to faculty and encouraged faculty to use OER if and when that's appropriate. And so this is something that's going to be around.
Yeah. I will say, I think a lot of us are already doing it. Everyone I've spoken to, I've asked, you happen to be using OER? And everyone seems to always tell me no, but then they tell me about something that they've created for their class. Even if it's not the textbook, they've created something that moves beyond the textbook that they use. And that's OER. They just haven't licensed it and they haven't provided it to a wider audience, but they are creating it. And again, we should be getting credit for that, but we should also be sharing it, because I know myself and I keep going this example, but myself and Dr. Garharchi came only a year apart. And so we were both new and teaching here. And, we shared a lot of resources back and forth creating a physical geography course. And had I not had that support, it would have been really difficult to create all that stuff on my own, because I had 4 new preps on top of research that I came in with that I was trying to complete. And then, of course, service. It makes it very difficult and easy to fall into, well, I'll just use a textbook by a large publisher because it's got all the quizzes, it has assignments, I can go in and teach, and students have that material. And to do it with others at the university made it so much more helpful and easy. And I think we are doing that. When people come in, we provide and we share our material. We just need to share it on a larger scheme so we can see what's being done across the university, not just with our neighbors in our offices or office areas. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with everyone today and give you my take on this. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to send them along to me. And I'd love to hear more about people using OER or considering to use it, and how they can incorporate it into their classes.
Well, thank you, Mark. I was waiting to see if anyone else was going to ask a question.
Sure.
So I just want to say thank you for being here. This has been an incredible presentation, a lot of incredible information, great information, and hopefully this will kind of be a seed that's planted that will help us grow this movement across JSU. So thank you for being here, Mark, and
Thank you.
also everyone else. Thank you for coming this afternoon and being part of this discussion. It's been a great discussion and a great presentation. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day, and stay safe in this weather. It's crazy out.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Chris, for inviting me.
Everyone have a good afternoon.
Chris, I think Hung Rong I wanted to see. I don't know if she just wants to talk with you or if she wants to talk with both of us.
Yeah, we can stay in here. Hung Wei, you can too if you want to. She's still.
Okay. Can we just, yeah, since all of us are here, I just want to report to you. I had a meeting actually with Dr. Walsh yesterday. I'm glad, and
Sorry, really quick, Hung Rong. Chris, can you stop the recording?
Oh, I thought I did. Hold on.
Yeah, just so when they put it in the repository.